Well, well, well. Across Australia, we have also seen thousands of people, maybe many more, I don't know, either quit in protest or lose their jobs because of vaccine mandates. Brave airline pilots like Graham Hood from Qantas and Alan Dana from Jetstar, policemen and women, nurses, doctors, and any number of people from companies ranging from Coles to Woolies, Telstra and CommBank, to their eternal shame, workers demonised for daring to question the vaccine mandates or simply for exercising what is their inalienable right to decide in consultation with their own doctor what to stick in their body. I was, I believe, one of the very first people to speak out against vaccine mandates and vaccine passports during COVID. For that, I was labelled a granny killer and all sorts of other grotesque insults. But to the eternal shame of the leaders and public health officials of the democracies of the West, who can forget the hysteria and, frankly, demonising of the so-called, oh, those filthy, disgusting, dirty, unvaccinated people?
This is being called a pandemic among the unvaccinated.
This is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
Pandemic of the unvaccinated.
This is a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
We have a pandemic among the non-vaccinated.
We could have had this under control. We were well on our way. And the only people that you can blame, this isn't shaming, this is the truth. Maybe they should be shamed, are the unvaccinated.
I've said a couple of times, really a pandemic and epidemic of the unvaccinated.
It just confirms that this really is a pandemic now of the unvaccinated.
The virus hunts down the unvaccinated.
Oh, they're crazy not to get vaccinated. Life will be miserable without being vaccinated. You won't be able to get any, you won't be able to hide, you won't be able to get a doctor to sign off that you got an exclusion, because there's quite set rules on that, and doctors will be audited to see every one of their exclusions will be looked at very carefully. They'll get fined, they can get struck off.
You bastards, you won't be able to hide. The virus will hunt you down, hunt down the unvaccinated. Doctors will get struck off. We're going to make life miserable for you. This is how the Australian governments treated Australian citizens during COVID. And that's when they weren't physically assaulting them. Oh yes, and let's just remind ourselves, what was the science behind this demonising of people, behind denying them their basic human rights, behind treating human beings as lepers, behind pummelling dissenters and pepper spraying grannies? That's right, the claim which I and many others queried at the time, so you got no excuse, you lot. And again, I was demonised for it. The claim was that the vaccine completely prevented transmission. Here's our old mate, the so-called sexy pin-up boy, Chief Medical Officer from Victoria, Brett Sutton.
And so getting that third dose is protection against severe illness, but also protection against getting infected in the first place.
OK, and don't forget how Brett Sutton viewed people who dared question mandatory mask wearing, mandatory lockdowns and vaccine mandates.
The first thing about protesters is, this is not just about being anti-mandated vaccination. They are anti-everything. They are anti-lockdown, they are anti the shutdown on international travel, they are anti-mask, they are anti-social distancing. They think that everything will be solved by taking a horse deworming tablet, ivermectin, that gives you the runs and that puts some people in hospital. They are literally in a fantasy world. So if they've taken mandated vaccination as a hook, so be it. But let's not pretend that these are otherwise rational individuals. They are absolutely wacky.
Oh, being opposed to mandatory vaccinations is not rational. You are absolutely wacky, says the Chief Health Officer. Apparently, Brett Sutton now has a degree in psychoanalysis as well. But hang on. Just a few weeks ago, former Federal Chief Health Officer Nick Coatsworth, one of the few actually worth listening to, called for, at this stage of the pandemic, vaccine mandates to be ditched. And only 5 days ago, the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, the same mob who we earlier heard screeching about the pandemic of the unvaccinated, announced it would no longer distinguish between vaccinated and unvaccinated people. Rebecca Weissel writes about this superbly in next week's Spectator Australia magazine. Make sure you read it. Oops, and now even Brett Sutton appears to have changed his tune.
Despite 2, 3, 4 doses of the vaccine, it's not so good at preventing infection in the first place. So we are getting infected. That's why we've had tens of thousands of cases in this wave.
Oh, it's not, isn't it, Brett? Really? Exactly what we were all saying about a year or so ago. I have repeatedly called for a royal commission into the political response and the bureaucratic response to COVID-19. Virtually every single thing we were all bullied and harassed over, from statewide lengthy lockdowns to police beating up protesters to forced mask wearing to closing down schools, all of it now appears to have either been ridiculously counterproductive or an unnecessary overreaction. Australians should be furious about what they were put through, particularly all those people who lost their jobs or their businesses. Of all the politicians around the world, almost none of you can hold your heads high. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, the man who will be the next president if Donald Trump decides not to run, is one of the very few who can, as we saw again this week, hold their head high. Here is one politician who doesn't speak meaningless gobbledygook, and despite himself being demonised uphill and down dale, never demonised anyone during COVID.
We made sure that we protected people's rights, and you look what's happened around the country, how they've done things like force these shots on people in the military, in the private sector. In the state of Florida, we fought Biden on that. We called a special session of the legislature, and now it's Florida law that nobody has to choose between a job they need and a jab they don't want.